Hi, I'm Chris Harvey, and today we're going to open up this modified Warre hive, show you how to inspect one, what to look for. We'll preface this video by telling you a few things. This hive was installed here, bees were installed in a brand new modified hive with foundation. This has the 4.9 millimeter small cell foundation in each one of the frames. I don't prefer to run modified Warre hives here in our apiary. This is only one of two that I have. The reason I set this one up this year is it was exactly for this purpose, so I could show folks how to do an inspection and how not to cause a lot of headaches for the bees by going in and seeing what we can see. It's a very important distinction to make that this is a modified Warre hive. Okay, this is a product that is sold exclusively by the Warre store. It is identical to a standard Warre hive in every way, except that each one of these hive bodies is about 3 centimeters taller than a standard Warre body. And that instead of top bars, it has frames. Okay, there's a lot of laws in the United States, state laws that require frames. Okay, now that being said, there are lots and lots of our customers who are running top bar hives all over the country. Okay, the vast majority of them just have verbal permission to use them. Okay, we're hobbyists. You know, we're not running 50 hives, 100 hives, whatever. You know, here in Michigan, there are no frame requirements. Okay, I have about 21 hives here in this apiary. And like I say, the vast majority of them are just standard Warre hives. We have a couple of octagon hives, we have 2 modified hives, and we have 2 langs that we're still running. Barring anything unforeseen, what we basically need: bee suit. Obviously, we're going to wear our bee suit. I have boot bands around the legs of my pants to keep any bees from going up my pant legs. Sometimes they go up there just out of curiosity, but when you're working a hive, you know, you really don't have time to be concentrating on the bee that's crawling up your leg. Okay, so boot bands are pretty helpful. A hive tool. This is to separate the boxes and also to separate the frames, so we can remove a frame or 2 or 3. This is a bee brush. When we put the hive back together, we're probably going to need this. Not for sure, but I wouldn't open up a hive without a bee brush. Okay, basically everything that you see me holding in my hands is stuff that is available in the starter kit. Gloves. Okay, I bring the gloves out here, but I'm not going to put them on unless I have a reason to. Okay, the gloves are great for a lot of things, but in this process, you know, there's a lot of sticky stuff in this hive. You know, there's honey, and hopefully we're not going to come in contact with much of that, but there's a lot of propolis. Propolis gets on the gloves, then the gloves start to stick together. Then you're trying to handle frames, and your gloves are sticking to the frames, and you know, prying and all that prying and pulling and stuck gloves, it just really irritates the bees. So if you can work with your bare hands, do this. That's the way to do it. All right, and you know, that might be a little bit intimidating, but I think you'll see that it's not that big a deal. All right, the most important thing: have a well-lit, fuel-filled smoker with you. Okay. Don't even think about doing this without a smoker. But I brought an extra modified hive body out here, and the reason I did that is if I remove some frames from this hive, which I intend to, it's nice to have a place to set them. Okay, now they make some things called frame holders for Langstroth beekeeping, where you basically hang it on the side of the box and then you can hang a couple frames there while you're doing your inspection. I actually prefer not to use those. I contemplated making those for the modified hives, but I decided against it because putting the bees in another box and keeping several frames together in another box, I think, is actually a much safer way of storing the frames during an inspection. We're going to remove the roof. Now, we don't need to smoke yet because the hive is not open yet. Find a nice level spot on the ground to put this roof where it'll be pretty stable. The extra modified body will be set right here, balanced on there like so. And we'll take our smoker, blow some smoke into the entrance, come upwind. We have a little breeze here today. and puff some smoke up into the screen bottom, again into the entrance. And I'm just going to set the smoker in front of the entrance. I've got a brick down there that it's sitting on, but that's basically just to keep the bees in check a little bit. You know, it's just the smoke coming out of the top of the smoker. Okay, quilt. Remove that and set it aside. The screen is still quite propolized to the frames, okay, and we totally expect that, sure. The bees are getting a little excited here. A little more smoke, and we're going to pull the screen up in one corner, and as we remove the screen, we're going to be smoking the bees. Our smoker back down. Get the bee on my hand. Brush him off. There's a couple on the screen. Okay, flick them off of there. Set the screen aside. Just set it right down there by the quilt. Get out the hive tool. The hardest part of this whole process will be getting the first frame out. Okay, and I will tell you that if you have a frame tool or a frame grip, it'll make the job easier. What we're basically going to do is take this end of the hive tool and place it between the first and second frames and give it a little twist. Okay, just enough to break loose the propolis. Do not force the frame against the outside of the hive box. Basically all you're doing is releasing the propolis bond between the frames. You don't want to move this thing hardly at all, okay? You squish bees, right? When you're handling a frame, the very most important thing that I could ever tell you is to never tip it like that, okay? Frames must be kept vertical. Doesn't matter what the angle is, you can put it up, you can turn it like so. You cannot lay it flat. This is especially important if you don't have foundation or if your frames aren't wired, because that comb will fall out of there in a minute, especially one that is weighed down with as much honey as this one is weighed down with. Which is really this is really a nice looking frame. Here's a close-up view. What you basically see is a lot of capped honey. Alright, that is capped honey that we're looking at there. And then below the capped honey is mostly pollen. Okay? If you turn to where the sun can be allowed to shine into the comb, you can see it quite well. A lot of pollen in this frame. And the bees are very calm. There's some honey in those cells where that pollen is stored as well, and the bees are you know, sucking that down because they've been smoked. This part of the sidebar you see doesn't have any propolis on it. Okay, that means it was facing, this is the outer frame, that was facing the wall of the hive. On the other side you can see the propolis on those sidebars. That's because that's where it was glued to the frame next to it. Okay. When you put it back in, you want to put it back in the same way. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that this box right here is the box that we're working with. Alright? And we're going to take and put this frame in just like it was in that, just the same exact way it was in that hive. And we'll keep it in order that way. I'm probably only going to maybe put one more in there, because now that I've got the one frame out, there's not a whole lot of reason to keep putting frames in this box. Okay, I'm confident that the queen is not on this frame, which is nice because I like to keep the queen in the hive. The bees drew out the bottom box most of the way within the last month or so. It's August right now. It's the beginning of August. It did take a little bit of time for them to get building on that in that bottom box, but they did it, and pretty healthy hive here. It's pretty nice Pretty nice healthy colony. Now here's a nice frame. This one's good for show because it has some brood in it. If you look at this frame closely, see if I can get it there. The top is capped honey. You can see it's yellow. It appears to be a wax capping on the comb. Okay. A little further down, it's dark, about the middle of the frame. If you look here, this kind of dark, that is honey under there. It still appears to have a waxy look. But down here, these look more like paper caps than wax caps. See that? They look more like paper bag. Same thing on this side. Okay, kind of look like a paper bag. That is capped brood. And I'm gonna try to get a nice picture of this. It's hard for me to see with this veil on, folks, so bear with me. But inside this area of the comb, look very closely, you see some what they call open brood, okay, uncapped brood or larva. All right, this capped brood is brood that is in the pupa stage. It is transitioning from a larva to an adult bee, and mixed in here with some of these capped brood are some open brood, some larvae, and you can see them curled up in the cells. At least I hope you can. There's honey at the top, pollen over the brood. This is a perfect example of a brood nest moving down. Okay, when this hive was first populated and the packages were first installed, this whole thing was a brood comb. Very little honey would have been at the top. Then there would have been a stripe of pollen. Then there would have been mostly brood. As you can see, the honey, the bees are backfilling the top of the frame with honey. The pollen is largely being covered by the honey, which is, if you extract this frame, the pollen will stay in it. If you crush and strain it in a strainer, you'll get that pollen in your honey, which is, you know, it has huge health advantages. Okay, but that's what's happening, is they're backfilling the top of the frame. The pollen is moving down, the brood is moving down, and as the next month or so goes by and we move into September here in Michigan, this is all going to be honey. That whole entire top box is going to be honey. Okay, and the brood nest is going to be in the bottom of the hive. That's how it works. Now, we're not going to harvest anything off this hive because it's only, you know, it's only going to have 2 bodies. They're not going to add a third. We're not going to add a third body to this hive this year. It's just not going to happen. But next year we will. And next year we'll be able to harvest honey off the top. And you know, at the beginning of next year, I'm going to add 2 boxes to the bottom of this hive. And hopefully next fall we're going to take these 2 boxes that will at that point have been on there for 18 months. We're going to pull them off. We're going to take that. Our frames have a beveled edge on one end and a square edge on the other. Once you're into the middle of this thing, you'll notice the sidebars have propolis on both sides. So if this frame was identical in every way, you could actually turn this around. You'd forget which way it was oriented, and you could put it in there backwards. Not that that would be the end of the world, but that's not the way the bees had it. So I'd like to put it back the way the bees had it. So with this rounded edge goes on the same side as the rounded edge of the first frame that I took out. The bees are starting to become a little more aware of me now. You can see that by seeing how many of them are on the top bars of the hive. Smoke the bees. And you know, they went back down in there for the most part. Going back to consuming some honey, and I can continue to talk to you and manipulate the hive a little bit without you know, them being so aware of me, and they're not certainly not stinging me. You see me standing here in my bare hands, with my bare hands. So I'm not big on disturbing hives. I mostly did this so that I could show you what it is you're looking for, what it is you're going to see, and how to handle the frames. That's mostly my purpose, you know. And remember the hive tool, you're using this end of it, you put that in between the frames and you turn, you rotate the whole tool to break the frames loose. And they can stick pretty good sometimes, okay? This propolis is sticky stuff. The biggest thing with disturbing, doing what we're doing right now, is the propolis seal between the frame. Any frames that you remove, you basically have to scrape that propolis off of those sidebars. This frame still has quite a bit of brood in it, a lot of capped brood. This is a pretty nice brood pattern. This is what we call a healthy brood pattern. Oftentimes, by the time you get to the center of the box, because this is a first-year hive, the brood nest will often be elongated, meaning it's in the center of the hive from pretty much from the bottom all the way to the top. Okay, but later in the year, again, this will all be filled with honey and the brood nest will be in the bottom. If there's any brood left in this hive body, the upper hive body at the end of the year, it's only going to be a tiny little bit. Okay, but that's a nice brood, beautiful brood pattern. Meaning, a healthy queen can lay an egg and have it develop in a healthy manner in almost every cell. You may not realize this, but there's about 1,200 cells right there. And I don't know how many are vacant besides the honey. You know, these ones that are uncapped here, some of them have pollen, some of them have honey, but I bet it's not more than 100 out of that whole body. So that is what you call a healthy brood pattern, meaning you have a good queen, a good prolific queen. She's a good layer. Again, don't lay the frame flat. Not ever. You can usually find a queen by finding the frame that has the most bees on it. But I'm gonna be honest with you, this hive is packed. It is literally packed with bees. It's a good one. You know, if it was a month earlier, I would put another box on this hive. But the honey flow here is really, really slowed down. I'd love to find the queen for you, but I don't think I'm going to continue to dismantle this hive. They're just so healthy, and they appear to be so happy, and I am not going to harvest honey off of this hive. I really have no reason to be in here at this point. I think I've shown you what I wanted to show you. If temperatures are such that the propolis is still flexible, it's still gooey, okay? As long as there's not too much propolis on those sidebars, you can usually push them together so that they're very close to the same position they were in before. They're never going to be exact. When you put the thing together, when it's clean, brand new frames, you got wood against wood. Just now when I push this, I can, you know, basically compress that frame against these other frames. There might be a 32nd of an inch of propolis in between. But now if the temperatures were cooler, excuse me, if they were cooler, the propolis would be very brittle. And if any of it got in between the sidebars, literally you would not be able to squish it. Okay, it's hard, it's brittle. But because it's gooey right now, it cooperates pretty well. If you need to scrape propolis off the sidebars, simply smoke the bees off of the sidebars. Take your hive tool, the long end, and remove that propolis from the sidebar. Do that on all four areas, both sides of the frame, both sidebars on both sides of the frame. Bees don't care for it much. I don't know if you can hear them. They're getting a little irritated with me. Lift that frame back up. When you put the frames together, you do it very, very slowly. Giving the bees time to get the heck out of there so you don't squish anybody. Okay? We only have one frame left to put in. First frame that we took out. And it's going to be tight. you recall, this is the frame that only had propolis on one side. The other side goes against the outside of the hive and wasn't propolized against anything. You see that group of bees hanging from the bottom of the frame? You're going to have to be really, really careful as we lower this in. When it gets basically to the bottom, that we're moving it so slowly that those bees are able to get out of there. Sometimes I jog the frame up and down a little bit just to say, hey girls, come on, you gotta move. Alright? If you squish a bee, you're gonna hear it. It's gonna go crunch. That's what they do. They crunch. Now putting this hive tool down a couple of inches and pushing on the sidebar like this, basically pushing that frame, making sure that it doesn't do this, okay, it doesn't cock in there, pushing a couple inches down on the sidebar, say here, so that I'm sandwiching it against the, you know, the frames that remain in the hive. And because these other frames that we never removed are so well propolized to the box, the whole thing as a group won't shift. Now if we removed all 8 frames and did this back in, it would be more difficult. We'd actually have to hold this other side and push them back together, okay? But because we still had, you know, we still had 5 frames here that had never been removed, so we can just push these 3 up tight. And that's it. Because a lot of the bees transferred into this box. What we're going to do is called shaking the bees back into the hive. Smoke them a little bit. Grab your screen. And the screen comes in handy for right now because bees don't like it much, but it doesn't hurt them. You can drape the screen over the top, lay it directly on those bees, and just kind of work it back and forth a little bit, like this. And what basically happens is when the bees line up with the spaces between the frames, they go down inside the hive because they don't like that thing dragging on them. We've got all of our bees out of there now. One little straggler right there. Get out of there, girl. There's no bees trapped underneath the screen. Okay? Pick up our quilt box. Look at the quilt box. See which way the propolis stripes are on the bottom of the quilt and put it back on the same way you took it off. That basically prevents it from getting stuck down so hard next time. And it also maintains a seal that the bees already had in place. Okay? And it's back together. Now, we sell modified hives because we want people to be able to use the Warre design, the size, the quilt, have all the advantages. And if you want to learn about bees, you need a modified hive. If you want to be able to study brood and find eggs and you know, find the queen and just generally understand what goes on, then you really need a modified hive. A window hive is not going to do it for you. You're not going to be able to see very much of anything with a window hive. You can basically see with the size of the nest and whether or not you've got a lot of bees in there. That's pretty much what you can see with a window hive. But as I showed you, you know, when you take frames out, there is a certain amount of, you know, maintenance in scraping the propolis and getting things back the way that you take them apart. That's why I didn't continue on. You know, you take all 8 frames of that out, or if you take the top hive body off and take frames out of the bottom, I mean, you have a lot of reassembly to do. And you know, you can inadvertently kill the queen. You could squish her. You can cause the brood to become chilled if you have the hive open too long, especially on a cooler day. You can, if you have several hives, or if there are feral bees or other kinds of other people's hives in your area, you can actually induce robbing, because you've just put that scent of honey in the air, and then pretty soon bees from other colonies start coming over, and next thing you know, your hive's getting robbed out. So there are bad things that can happen. You just have to be aware of them. And you know, to me, want to study bees, just go in from time to time and take a peek at a frame or two. when the colony is smaller, like I say, you can pull out the 1 or 2 or 3 frames that have the most bees and find the queen. That can be fun, and you can become good at it after, you know, a very short time. They're not nearly as hard to find as you might think. So I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching.